Hey, what's up guys? So for my first, call it current events with Hoshnasi, or burning current events, burning down current events, we're gonna talk about Antonin Scalia. He died today, February 13th. He was 79 years old and apparently he died of natural causes. Why Scalia was important is because he was the third of the three relatively conservative of all the judges. Antonin Scalia was appointed by Ronald Reagan, and as many of you know, Supreme Court judges are appointed for life. Considered by many to be a non-interventionist judge. He wanted to basically use the original intent of the Constitution from his viewpoint of where laws today should be viewed in terms of being constitutional or unconstitutional. Many progressive type people viewed he as one of the largest road bumps in getting large progressive laws into the books. And what do I mean by progressive is society changing laws that are different than the status quo that we are known for. So for example, if the original framers of the Constitution viewed the Constitution as a black and white thing, and then if you add all the years the country has been a country, society has changed somewhat in what people value in terms of what the Constitution stood for, what the states versus federal rights were supposed to be, and who had the most power on which side of, it's like Federalist v. Anti-Federalist type of stuff. He had more of a black and white view that all laws should be seen or witnessed under the eyes of what the original Constitution and the intent of the framers was. That put him at odds with many liberal judges and many liberals in the Senate and the legislative side of the government. In the recent years, Scalia had a few court cases that came to the Supreme Court that kind of put him at odds with conservatism, but still, I think he maintained true to his original intent of viewing law through the lens of maintaining what the Constitution was built on in its origin. Case in point, voting to uphold free speech. In two cases, he voted to defend the flag burning case that came out of Texas, as well as striking down prohibition on hate speech. He viewed the First Amendment as paramount and important as a civil right. So while that may put him at odds with conservatives, remember he's considered to be one of the great conservative judges, by defending a flag burning case, which is usually a pretty anti-conservative line to toe, taking this freedom of speech approach, kind of separated him from a lot of other conservatives, particularly those in the legislature, when they viewed situations like flag burning. I think one of his very important quotes was one where he voiced the dissenting opinion on the Obamacare mandate that basically went to the Supreme Court to discuss the kind of tax subsidy of creating a situation or a service where people got funded medical care kind of at the behest of other taxpayers. And here's his quote. He used the term interpretive jiggery pokery, in which words no longer have meaning. In his dissenting opinion, he wrote, "We should start calling this SCOTUS care." Basically, he added that when you start using these fiddly words to imply intent or the idea of how things are supposed to go, you stray again away from what he thought the original intention was of the Constitution. Nowhere really in the Constitution does it say that the government can force people to either pay a tax, in the case of healthcare, or go into an agreement with a third party, in this case insurance company, right? We've never seen that before. And he pointed out that dichotomy, that oddity that many people seem to have just glossed over. It doesn't matter that you're for Obamacare. It matters on how you fund Obamacare. And if your way of funding Obamacare is to force all people, when they draw a breath in this country and be considered a citizen, to enter into a contract with a third party, an insurance provider, then you're really breaking new ground. We've never done that before. And you may progressively feel that it's right for there to be some kind of single payer or some kind of social or some kind of situation where the government gets involved and decides on how we fund and whom is funded insurance. You have to appreciate, though, that was the first time that we had ever done that. And he goes further. The court's decision reflects the philosophy that judges should endure whatever interpretive distortions it takes in order to correct a supposed flaw in the statutory machine. That philosophy ignores the American people's decision to give Congress all legislative powers enumerated in the Constitution. See, again, he's actually, with this dissension, claiming that really this should be in the hands of the legislature, and only should the Supreme Court be brought involved when it comes to either deciding for or against a law that is already in place. When it came to Obamacare, we really saw both legislature kind of shoehorning things in, which happens, right? That happens a lot, plus all the other riders and tack-ons and stuff like that. But really an instance where activist judicial system or activist judges were allowed to kind of cement something into our now national narrative that we've never really had before. Again, consider where this is coming from. You're talking about something that's never been done. You've never had to go with a third party as mandated by the federal government. Very important to understand that distinction. Call it tax, call it whatever you want. Something else, so while he is a supporter of the freedom of speech, he's also against abortion, and he also voted against the same-sex marriage law that went through the Supreme Court. And he added, at odds not only with the Constitution, but with the principles upon which our nation were built. The reason why I wanted to talk about Scalia, and not just Scalia, I would have talked about any judge, is the importance that we try to maintain our objectivity when it comes to discussing people, particularly either posthumously or when it's about their dissensions against things that we might be in support of, take same-sex marriage or whatever. It was his opinion, and I believe explained thoroughly in his dissension of same-sex marriage, that this goes beyond what the Constitution was written for in regards to states' rights versus federal rights, and whom has more power and where the dividing boundaries are of whom can force laws upon the individual citizens. Scalia was an interesting person in that way because while he was very conservative, and I was definitely in support of a lot of his Second Amendment, it is things like this dichotomy, that I find makes him a decent judge and will probably be viewed well posthumously. Now, that's the thing when it comes to the Supreme Court. We need more people, I think, like him. They don't necessarily have to be conservative, but I feel that the judges that go forward should try and have this view that we should try and keep judicial law away from legislative law, the making of law. And they should only look at laws in terms of them being in violation to the Constitution and our civil rights or not. And they should only want to take cases where questions of civility or civil rights comes into play in regards to the federal level versus the states level. Otherwise, see, again, how does this all work? You start at the states level and you work your way up until you get to the Supreme Court. Well, not all things need to be heard by the Supreme Court. Only things that affect the Constitution should be seen at the Supreme Court. So whether or not you agree in gay rights regarding marriage, he viewed that was better served at the states level and should have never been brought up to the federal level. Same thing with Obamacare. So that's why I wanted to talk about this. It's very important that you understand what he's saying, not just his opinion, but why. Why does he go into these links to explain what he said was this jiggery-pokery of interpretive speech? Because now you're using the Supreme Court as the cudgel to make new law or defend new law in its own being for the sake of what you believe is right or wrong from a judicial standpoint based off of today's society instead of that of the Constitution as written, which was what he advocated for, which is what I advocate for too. Now, let's talk about where we go from here. It's a two-step process, the second step being a little bit more muddy in regards how we get a new replacement for Scalia. Obama, in his last term, ending in 2017, right, something like that, basically has the ability to propose a new Supreme Court justice. He proposes that justice, and then it goes to the Senate. And usually what happens is there's a small committee that vets this judge, and ultimately, regardless of the vetting, they still go to the floor and they have a vote, and it's a simple majority, meaning a 51% vote in the legislature, in the Senate. So that's all it takes to get a judge on the Supreme Court for life, which is one of the reasons why I feel that that power wielded by the president makes that job so very much important, because it shaped, right? Particularly now that we've lost somebody like Scalia, who had this kind of non-intervention policy when it came to laws. If you replaced him with someone who has a progressive interventionist mentality for laws, and progressive conservatively or liberally, doesn't matter, just progressive, that could shift the whole balance of power of what goes on with our laws. And not just the year in which that person was elected or proposed or brought into the Supreme Court, but their entire life, because they are approved and elected or selected for life to be in that role. Very important. It's very important to understand why people talk about the Supreme Court justices in the way they do, because they are so important. They really, really are. And I think Scalia, we lost something great with Scalia because of his non-intervention policies when it came to law. I know I'm repeating that a lot, but I want it to be understood that he really did exemplify the idea that only things that affect the Constitution, and largely the Constitution and the intention of our forefathers, he really tried to get in their head and understand what their thoughts were when they created the laws they did. So we've lost an ally, I think, in terms of conservatism, let alone the idea of a small government constitutionalist, that of my kind of libertarian policies. So we've lost an ally, and that's, you know, that's always a sad thing. I hope that Obama either doesn't choose to elect a judge, which he can do, or he nominate a judge, or that he picks somebody that also is an interventionist or a non-interventionist. We can hope. Anyway, thanks very much for watching this first episode of Burning Down Current Events, and thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe. Take it easy.